Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Corey Camp, and today we bring back Mindy Polansky. She is one of our virtual coaches on our elite team of coaches here at Sibme. And in addition to coaching, Mindy is in her 29th year in education. She's been an instructional coach as well as a classroom teacher. She's national board certified, a local letters trainer, and master teacher for the state of Maryland. Currently, in addition to Sibme coaching, she is also a third grade teacher teaching all content areas to her class of third graders. Welcome, Mindy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. It's always fun to get to chat with you. I always love our conversations. So today we're breaking down some footage. We're going to be talking about ways to support students along with ways to communicate the responsibility and accountability required of students. So we're looking at a specific technique, and I know you've mentioned this before in other episodes with us, the no opt-out technique. Yeah. So Mindy, tell me, what do you mean by no opt-out? And this is a teach like a champion technique. So what is it and why is it important?
Sure. So no opt-out is a technique that it helps teachers communicate to their students that it's okay not to know, but it's not okay to not try.
Right.
Through the questioning and the cues that are utilized in this technique, students will begin to realize that their teacher is there to support them, their classmates are there to support them, it's okay to make a mistake, somebody's going to be there, and that we learn from our mistakes. What you accept will continue. So if you allow students to shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know, or just not answer, and you never address that, then that will continue in your classroom. It'll be very hard to change that culture in the classroom. And by messaging to students that, okay, you don't know, but let's figure out what we can do to get you there, that's leading into that growth mindset that will help students persevere and persist. And so it's a really great technique to build relationships with students and to support your students. And just let them know that the classroom is a place where you can take a risk and where you will get support to help you.
Yeah. And so I had myself muted there for a second. I think this is an important one to kind of think about. And before we jump into our video, I'd like to just talk about, do we always have this no opt-out technique going, or are there times when it's appropriate to let our students opt out?
Sure. So again, going back to knowing your students and understanding where they come from as far as academics, as far as socially. You don't want to use it, I think, as a gotcha, kind of the student who's not paying attention and, zero in on them. It's really a time for students to understand the discourse in a classroom. Now, sure, there should be some times where if you've got a disrespectful student who is not willing to participate, you might stop the cueing and the questions and the support then, and then come back to them at another time to discuss what was going on. Or if you have a student who you can see the stress on their face, you may pass on that. But for the most part, it's not okay to opt out. It's not okay to not want to try. So there are barriers for why people don't want to try, but it's up to the teacher to remove those barriers through their questioning, through relationships, and through the culture of the classroom.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned kind of noticing when a student is, maybe one of my confident students is suddenly really kind of struggling today. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep. Maybe there's something going on at home and they just need to have a little pressure taken off of them. And for some reason, this activity is causing some anxiety. But then there's also those students who, maybe we let them opt out a couple of times and then we start to see it's a pattern. So knowing when to adjust, I think, is really important. Like you said, it goes back to knowing our students and supporting that growth mindset that they, I know you don't feel like doing, but I know you can do this today. So you're not going to be able to opt out today, knowing when to and how to get students to adhere to that. So we're gonna look at a video example of this. We're gonna check this out. This is a first grade classroom, and Mindy, as we watch this video, what are we looking for?
Sure. So one of the things that we definitely need to look for is when a student has made a mistake, how the teacher responds to that. So we want to look for any incorrect answers. And then if there are, spoiler alert, there is an incorrect answer. We want to notice how the teacher responds. What tone does the teacher use? What's the word choice? And there are different formats for the no opt-out. So see if we can figure out which format she's using. Is it the teacher gives the answer and the student just repeats it, or is there another process? So that's what we want to kind of look out for, is how the teacher saying, no, that's not right. Does anybody else have the right answer?
All right. So we're going to watch this whole clip through, and then we'll kind of go back and play a few moments back and look at them in isolation. All right, here we go.
Okay, team 4, did you guys all come up with the same answer? No. Okay. How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with? How come you two are partners but you have different answers? So let's think about this. Explain to her why, since more of you have 7, explain to her, why do you have 7? What did you do?
We subtracted.
You subtracted 10.
We took our fingers. We took 3.
Okay. Why did you take 3 away?
Because you said.
How many did you start with? 10 cubes, because how long was the book? 10 cubes. And then it said that the box was going to be how many shorter? 3 shorter. So how many did you take away? 3. And then how many did you have left?
7.
Emma, go ahead and go up to the book up there. And there's 10 cubes underneath it. I want you to cover up 3 and see how many are left. Yep. Okay, did you guys all get the same answer here? It's okay. All right. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. I'll pause this. All right, Brooklyn, just a second, please. Hold on. All right. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. 1, 2, eyes on you.
All right. I like how she was like, one second, let me pause this. And then she got her call to attention strategy. So let's go ahead and go back through this. So Mindy, you just tell me where you want us to go and look at, and I'll let you kind of direct us through this.
Okay. So it's obvious where the incorrect answer is. So can we stop at around 14 seconds?
Yes.
So start the beginning and stop at 14 seconds.
Let's go.
Okay, team 4, did you guys all come up with the same answer? No. Okay. How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with?
7.
How many did you come up with?
8.
How come you two are partners but you have different answers?
Okay, so here we're waiting to see, okay, so how is the teacher going to respond to the student who has an incorrect answer? I couldn't tell quite if she responded to, she asked the question of, you two work together, how did you get different answers?
Right.
If you really wanted to respond to that, or if that was just a rhetorical question to get them to realize, you have a different question. You two have a different answer. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So if we could keep going then until 22 seconds.
So let's think about this. Explain to her why, since more of you have 7, explain to her, why do you have 7? What did you do?
We subtracted.
So here, this is a great example of one of the formats of no opt-out, is having another student explain the process, not give the answer, because that is one thing you could do. You could have them say, okay, what is the answer? Now, this example would not be a good place for that. Maybe if it was a vocabulary term or something like that. But here, the teacher has put the onus on the students to explain the process of what they did.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's important. A lot of times you'll find that your group didn't really work together. They all had a different process, and then they just, shared their answers with each other. So it's really about getting them to come back and, did you work together as a group? How did you do that? What might we need to do differently?
Right.
Definitely.
Exactly. Because now you're messaging that, look, one person had a different answer. Maybe while you were working, you could have talked through that instead of waiting for me, the adult in charge, to recognize that there was an incorrect answer or a different answer. And then have, the poor girl who was the student who got 8, she could have been right. And, so it would have been nice for them. So I think that's what the teacher is kind of doing, is letting them know, you can explain what you did to your partner, in a respectful way, and figure out, how to give corrective feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so the next stop, if you wouldn't mind, play to about 38 seconds.
Okay.
You subtracted 10.
We took our fingers. We took 3.
Okay. Why did you take 3 away?
Because you said.
How many did you start with? 10 cubes, because how long was the book? 10 cubes. And then it said that the box was going to be how many shorter? 3 shorter.
All right, play a little bit longer there,
but that's okay. I mean, out of the mouths of babes. Why did you take away 3? Because you told us to.
Right. I know. Yeah. So this is definitely an example of
laugh every time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So and like you said, sometimes we get different answers because maybe we were trying to work together as a group, but Susie was sure she had a different way to do it, and she wasn't cooperating very well with the rest of us, or we didn't stop to check and make sure our group was all together. But then also in the instructions of the teacher, right? What are they, how much of this are they really processing through themselves, and how much are they just kind of looking because they're not quite maybe ready for that level of practice?
When I first watched this clip, I thought, my goodness, why did she just gloss over that because you told us to? And then after watching it, I thought, she's dealing with the pacing of the lesson. You don't want to go off to no, it's not just because the questions that she prompted immediately after got them to realize, well, the book was 10, squares, and the box was 3 less. So that's why you subtracted 3, not because I told you to. So, but she didn't say it that way. She said it in a respectful way. She said it in a way that guides them to why they really subtracted the 3. And you can tell that she's done this many times because her reactions were so smooth, so respectful, and positive, that it encourages students to be able to realize, okay, we're here to help each other, especially in this cooperative setting, and I'm not going to opt out just because I didn't get the answer right.
Right. Yeah. That's great. So when we start to think about, those tips for teachers or coaches who are working with teachers and how to do this, how do we get to the level that this teacher kind of is, where you can tell she's done this a few times, that her routine of this kind of group work looks to be one that these students are used to. They're all kind of working together. You can tell that they're all in their own little spaces, and that they've kind of got it. So what do you recommend for teachers who are implementing this no opt-out? How can they best prepare?
So I think that creating a culture and telling kids why you're not going to leave the conversation with them is critical. I think teachers also need to prepare for students who get the answer right with another question to dig a little deeper. I mean, no opt-out is great for rigorous questions. So you want to make sure that you have a plan for when a student is incorrect, or for when a student is, answer the question, but you can go dig deeper. So you really need to learn and be aware of the different types of no opt-out, of how to the techniques to help students. And you also need to practice them. Even have a little having little cards on my teacher badge, so I can, she just made a mistake. Let me see really quickly what I can respond with. So just know that there are different formats. Like I said before, if it was a vocabulary, you might ask another student to give the definition, and then have the student who got it incorrectly, answered incorrectly, repeat it, because you want to end with the correct answer. That's one thing. You may ask more probing questions to cue. So there's a variety of different formats that you can use. And there's a variety of different settings, whether it's for reading or vocabulary, and just understanding the tone and the word choice that you use to let students know that you didn't get it right, or you didn't know, but I'm going to support you. And here's what you need to think about, because internally they'll start to ask themselves those questions as well. If they hear those cues or those sentences or those questions enough, eventually when they make a mistake, they'll start to ask themselves those same questions.
Yeah, like you said, it's like creating that culture and that expectation of I don't know is not enough. Like we don't just stop there. We talked about this a little bit in our growth mindset. It's that yet or and then,
Right.
getting them to really understand that. One of my favorite resources, I was an explicit instruction trainer, and she's, Anita Archer's worked closely with Doug Lemov and the Teach Like a Champion, which is what this particular no opt-out technique comes from. But so she used a lot of those similar strategies. And one of my favorite resources that came out of that explicit instruction training, it's in the book, is the types of responses. So Anita Archer talks a lot about active participation and getting more students responding, and the no opt-out. But then once they respond, then what? Like, then how do we respond as a teacher if it's a correct answer, but they said so hesitantly, right? They're not quite sure yet. So you can affirm and confirm for them. If they really confidently said the incorrect answer, how do we go about responding to that in a way that's going to be the most acceptable way just to respond to our students? So I love that tip of, kind of being prepared of, what do we say whenever we need to give corrective feedback and support kind of in the moment, as you're like, this teacher was like, you mentioned the pacing. She was kind of jumping from group to group, but then making sure that we honor the correct responses. Just kind of all the responses need some kind of a response. They don't all need you to go back and kind of reteach if it's correct. So how do we affirm and confirm kind of in the most appropriate way?
One of the, when you mentioned Anita Archer, I've seen her many times, just adore her. That one of the techniques that I have gleaned from her is the think and then respond. Because a lot of times you ask a question, and if you don't give students enough wait time, then they opt out because, well, I know that, Haley's going to answer it correctly, so why should I even bother? So it's a really good strategy to help students know that you can opt out, but I'm giving you time to think.
Right.
Nobody's to call out, nobody's to say anything, because again, in the culture of a classroom, if you've got those kids who constantly answer correctly and the teacher relies on them so that the lesson can go quicker, then, I'm going to take the path of least resistance and opt out. So using that technique of, here's a strategy that's going to help you to not opt out. I'm going to give everybody equal time to think. That helps with the students as well.
Yeah, that wait time is really key. And one of my favorite things also from that is, considering having them write down, do some kind of written response. So even if they're not the first one with their hand up or they don't get called on, they've all written it down, or they hold up the whiteboard, or they do one of the response cards. I think all of those are really great. And those more action and written type responses are great ways to kind of start, I think, with no opt out. It's a little bit easier than a verbal response, I think.
The pinch cards or things. Yeah.
Yeah. The plickers are one of my favorite technology kind of cards. So those are great. So I love that. And I love that we got to see this in action with a teacher and see kind of how she implemented that. So what do you see next with this teacher in using video to continue to support them if you were coaching?
Okay, so again, it was a brief video. What I would be curious to find out about is, how did she approach the girl student who went up? How did she follow up with her? As a teacher, I know you got to get to all the groups. You got to check in, and I think it was great that she had the student go do a concrete example on the board. And I'm hoping that at some point she came back to the student and had the student, review what the correct answer is, what the correct answer was, and how she got there. So that's what I would be looking for next.
Yeah. And I love that, because, sometimes that's the part that will stress a teacher out, is if I've got this no opt out thing, and I start to realize that more of my students are, maybe getting the incorrect answers or struggling a little bit more than I anticipated, because now I have more data coming to me, right? Right. What do I do? And how do I still save pace with what I'm doing? So knowing when it's maybe time to pull in, a small group and do a quick reteach, or making sure that we circle all the way back around to some of those students that we've asked to go back and kind of think a little bit more through that, giving strategies to help them manage, because then it goes back into time management as a strategy.
Right.
I love that. All right, Mindy. Well, thank you so much for joining us again today and sharing this technique with us from Teach Like a Champion and breaking down that footage. It's always wonderful to have you in on the Coach Replay Show. So thanks again for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Yes, of course. All right, audience, tune in next week for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show.